12 people, 2 names, 9 still blank. That is Cleveland's official count, September 1935 to August 1938. The most famous lawman in America commanded this city's police and fire for those years, and he never charged anyone. Some will tell you he knew the name. A private certainty is not a finding. The record holds a colder fact. 9 of the 12 still have no name. That number is where this story ends, and it is where it starts. Kingsbury Run is not a legend's name. It is a creek bed on Cleveland's Near East Side, running from about East 90th and Kinsman down to the Cuyahoga. In the 1930s, it was rail yards, trestles, ballast, and tar paper shanties. A Hooverville in a ravine. To the east sat the roaring third. Bars, brothels, men with no address. The dumps would follow that ground. The city above it had a skyline. The Run did not. This was the Depression. People slept in the Run because they had nowhere else. Shanties without toilets, without water, built against the ballast. Investigators would later walk that ground looking for a killer. First, they had to understand the pond. The victims were not pulled from gated streets. They were taken from a world that already had no names on the doors, and most of them would keep that silence. What the official series showed, again and again, was a method. Decapitation, often the cause of death. Frequent dismemberment. Some remains treated with a chemical that left the skin red and leathery. Heads often missing. In the record, the wounds repeat. It is the ground that changes. The dumps followed the tracks, the Run, the river, the lake, and at the end, a dump in sight of City Hall. The official count begins on the 23rd of September, 1935, on a slope the city called Jackass Hill, East 49th at Kingsbury Run. 2 bodies, 1 dump. The first officer on that ground was a homicide detective named Orley May. He was not a celebrity. He was the man who had to look. Above him, a new safety director was settling into City Hall. The hillside did not care about either of them. The first of the 2 has never been named. The file calls him John Doe 1. Chemical, oil, or fire had turned the skin reddish and leathery. He was left on the same hill as the man beside him. That is almost his whole biography. No fingerprint hit, no family at the door. He is still John Doe 1, and he is still on the official 12. The second man on that hill got a name because the city still had his fingerprints. Edward Anthony Andrassy, 29 years old. His head had been buried nearby. Rope burns on his wrists. Cause of death, decapitation. Dead 2 or 3 days. The first confirmed identification on the official 12, recovered from ink on a card, not from a face anyone recognized. Andrassy had been a psychiatric ward orderly at City Hospital. By the time he was found, he was unemployed. He is one of 2 people on the official list who can be spoken of as a person, not a number. A job, a workplace, an age. The file offers that ordinary weight only once more. The other 10 official victims will not get a fingerprint door to walk through. 9 of those 10 will not get a name at all. 4 months later, on the 26th of January 1936, the city found the second name. Remains, wrapped in newspaper, in half-bushel baskets, left beside Hart Manufacturing on Central Avenue near East 20th. About 10 days later, more remains on Orange Avenue. The head was never found. The objects are what the case keeps. baskets, newsprint, a factory wall. Not the body. Fingerprints again. Florence Genevieve Polillo, 44. A waitress, a barmaid, living at East 32nd and Carnegie. She is the second confirmed identification on the official 12, and the last one that will hold. After her, the file will try a third name, and will not be allowed to keep it. 2 named by fingerprints. That number was set then, and it has never moved. 2 names, and the year is only 1936. The official list will run to 12 before it stops. The Encyclopedia of Cleveland History would later tally the 12 as 7 men and 5 women, all decapitated, most dismembered. Those are the city's numbers, not a theory. What the numbers do not give you is a person you can bury under a real name. That work has barely started, and it is already almost finished. On the 5th of June, 1936, between the New York Central and the Nickel Plate tracks, they found another man. His head was recovered near the Shaker Heights Rapid Transit tracks. The file calls him John Doe II. The city would come to call him the Tattooed Man. He is still unnamed. In 1936, he was a face the city thought it could match. 6 tattoos were the whole of his offered biography. Helen and Paul, and a bird, a heart and an anchor, a flag with the letters WCG, a butterfly, jigs, Cupid. His undershorts carried a laundry mark, JD. Someone had loved him enough, or known him enough, to put names in his skin. Thousands of people would be asked if they recognized the rest of him. They would not. Cleveland built a death mask and put it where a city goes to look. The 1936 Great Lakes Exposition. A public exhibit, not a morgue slab. The mask was shown to thousands. Men and women filed past a plaster face the way they filed past a midway. If anyone in that crowd had known him, the file would have gained a 3rd fingerprint-level name. It did not. The queue was not being asked who killed him. It was being asked who he was. A laundry mark, 6 tattoos, a face in plaster, and a city of hundreds of thousands walking past. The exposition ended. The mask went back into the file. John Doe II stayed John Doe II. He is still one of the 9. The killer was still dumping. Most of the dead still had no names. A city filed past a face and went home not knowing it. That is the turn this case keeps making. The famous half of the story is a lawman. The haunting half is that queue. Stay with the unnamed. The dumps do not stop here, and the names do not arrive. What arrives next is a wider map and a safety director who will try to drain the pond. 1 year before the official count even started, on the 5th of September, 1934, a lower body washed up on the Lake Erie shore just east of Bratenahl. The head was never found. The press would later call her the Lady of the Lake. She has hung at the edge of this case ever since. She is not one of the 12. The official count never took her in. She is a candidate, and only a candidate. Investigators later compared a chemical on her skin to the lime used on other remains. Their reconstruction: the killer may have meant quicklime and used a preserving lime instead. That reading is the investigator's own. It is enough to keep her in the conversation. It is not enough to add her to Cleveland's official tally of 12. She stays a candidate. The homicide file belonged to men who walked the tracks. Peter J. Murillo, lead detective, who would later go undercover as a hobo. Orly May, who had stood on Jackass Hill. They were not Eliot Ness. Ness held the civilian job above them, command of the police and the fire. Cleveland's director of public safety, appointed under Mayor Harold Hitz Burton in 1935. At 32 or 33, he kept the post until 1942. On the 15th of September, 1936, the coroner and the police held a crime clinic at Central Police Station. The safety director attended. He did not take over the homicide file. The meeting belonged to the working police and the coroner's office, not to the legend of Ness seizing the case. Murillo and May still walked the dumps. Ness still sat where a safety director sits, above the department, not in the weeds. On the 22nd of July, 1936, the only official dump on the west side, Big Creek in Brooklyn. A man, never identified, John Doe III. He was found near a homeless camp, and the ground said he had been killed there. Every other official dump in the series sits on the east side, or in the flats, or on the lake. This one crossed the river. The file never named him either. Later that same year, the file adds John Doe IV, a man found in a stagnant pool near East 37th Street. The head was never found. Secondary chronologies often give the dump a September day. A printed date from the coroner's own file, if one exists, has never surfaced. So the day stays soft, and the rest stays hard. A man, a pool, a street, no name. The 23rd of February, 1937, Euclid Beach, East 156th, an upper body on the lake. About 3 months later, the lower half at East 30th. Head, arms, legs, never found. Cause of death left undetermined. The file calls her Jane Doe 1. She is one of the 12. She is not the lady of the lake. She was left almost where that 1934 candidate had come ashore. The same shoreline, twice. A candidate in 1934, an official victim in 1937. Almost the same ground. The first woman stays outside the 12, where the record has always kept her. But the echo is not nothing. Someone was using the lake as a door. The city could not name the woman on the official list then, and it has not named her since. On the 6th of June, 1937, under the Lorraine-Carnegie Bridge, a partial skeleton in a rotting burlap bag. Newspaper from June 1936 lay with the bones. Police, and her own son, believed the dental work matched a missing woman named Rose Wallace, 40 years old, gone since the 21st of August, 1936. But the dentist was already dead. The identification could not be certified. Time since death was estimated at about a year. Wallace had been missing about 10 months. The dates did not agree. Some later summaries treat her as identified. The record never did. The identification was never certified, and officially she remains Jane Doe 2, which leaves the ledger where it stands. 2 named, 1 maybe, 9 still blank. Wallace is the maybe. She is only ever the maybe. The 6th of July, 1937, the flats. An upper body in a chicken feed burlap sack, and the thighs in the Cuyahoga. The head and several organs were never found. John Doe 5, never identified. The river had become a dump now, like the tracks, like the hill, like the lake. The same plain objects, a feed sack, black water, a city that could not say his name. Into 1938, The river kept taking what it was given. On the 8th of April, a leg in the Cuyahoga. On the 2nd of May, more remains in Burlap, east of the West 3rd Street Bridge. Head and arms, never found. The file calls her Jane Doe 3. She is one of the official 12. She has never been named. The river, once again, a dump. She is the only official victim with morphine in her system. 0.002 of a gram per 100 grams. The number is the coroner's. It does not name her, and it does not name him. One precise chemical fact, sitting in a file that still cannot say who she was. A detail, not an identification. It belongs to Jane Doe 3, and to no one else on the list. Period. Police looked at the cuts and worked a theory. A single skilled hand, a surgeon, or a butcher. That is a reading of wounds, not an identification. Other readings lived in the same building. Murillo leaned toward a rail riding transient. A later writer would argue for more than one killer. Theories, all of them. None produced a charge. None produced a name for the 9. By now, the official list is almost full, and the city still cannot name most of the dead. 2 fingerprint identifications, 1 tentative that will not hold, the rest, blank. That has been the shape of this case from the beginning, and it has not moved. What moves next is the famous half. The safety director is about to try to drain the pond. Watch the dates. Murillo went into the run as a hobo. He lived the pond from the inside, looking for a man who used it. The undercover work produced no arrest. Across the life of the file, thousands of people were questioned. Thousands. Later summaries print an exact figure, but it is a second-hand number, and the scale is what the record actually carries. The search was enormous. It never ended in a courtroom. The 16th of August, 1938. A dump at the end of East 9th Street, on the lakefront. 2 people, Jane Doe IV and John Doe VI. They were left in view of Eliot Ness's office at City Hall, the last official pair. And Jane Doe IV was unusual in one way the others were not. Her head and her hands were with the body. The file still has no name for either of them. Not a hidden ravine this time. Not a stretch of black water. A dump the safety director could have seen from his office window. The official series, which began on a hillside in 1935, ends on his doorstep. 3 days later, he will lead a raid on the shantytown. Everything in the next turn hangs on the order of those 2 facts. The bodies first, the fire second. That order is the whole argument. About 1 in the morning on the 19th of August, 1938, Ness personally led a raid on the Kingsbury Run shantytown. Occupants were taken into custody. How many is a question the period counts answer differently, and the 1938 press never settled on a single number. Then firemen torched the place, tar paper and timber going up in a ravine the city had tolerated for years. It looked like an ending. It was not an arrest. Ness's stated reasons were not a confession extracted from the flames. Fingerprint the population, so the next victim might have a name. Remove easy prey from the run. On the 22nd of August, 6 two-man teams went out under the guise of fire inspections, from the Cuyahoga to East 55th to Prospect. They found no killer. What they documented was fire trap housing, without toilets, without water. Here is the date that breaks the easy story. The last official pair was found on the 16th. The fire came on the 19th. The last official victims were already on the lakefront before the shanties burned. A later one-line history would compress those days and say the burning ended the torso murders. That is more weight than the dates will hold. The correlation is real. A proven mechanism is not. After that, Cleveland had no more official dumps. Earlier that same year, in the usual reconstruction late May, Ness had ordered a secret interrogation in a downtown hotel. The man brought in was a surgeon, Dr. Francis Edward Sweeney. He was held until he was sober, about 3 days, then questioned by David Cowles of the Scientific Investigation Bureau. Leonard Keeler ran a polygraph. Ness was told Sweeney failed it. No charge followed. That is the second turn. The fire lights, and still there is no arrest. The famous lawman carries a name in his head, and nothing he can take to a jury. The evidence against Sweeney was circumstantial. No physical proof tied him to any dump. A polygraph result, remembered later, is not an indictment. Ness did not arrest him. Nobody ever did. The official Cleveland list has already stopped. What comes after is aftermath, not a solution. Francis Edward Sweeney, born the 5th of May, 1894, a World War I medical unit behind him. Field amputations, gas, an alcoholic from about 1929. Separated from his wife by 1934. A surgical resident at St. Alexis Hospital in 1929 in the Kingsbury Run area. First cousin of Representative Martin L. Sweeney. Died the 9th of July, 1964, in a Dayton Veterans Hospital. None of that is a conviction. Sweeney's cousin in Congress, Martin Sweeney, is a political fact. It is not proof of a cover-up. No document in the record says so. After Sweeney committed himself to a veterans institution, Cleveland recorded no more official torso dumps. The sequence is real. Causation is a claim. The last official pair is still the 16th of August, 1938. A man walking into a sanitarium is not the same thing as a case closing. So the official 12 sit where the city left them. September 1935 to August 1938. 2 names from fingerprints. 1 tentative that remains Jane Doe 2. 9 still unnamed. 0 charges from the safety director's office. The run is quieter. The file is not closed. And into that quiet, in the summer of 1939, the county sheriff produces a man of his own. Frank Dolezal, born the 4th of May, 1887, a Bohemian bricklayer, 52 years old. He had lived with Florence Polillo. The investigation said he knew Andrassy and knew Wallace. In the first week of July 1939, Cuyahoga County Sheriff Martin O'Donnell arrested him for Polillo's murder. Not Ness. Ness did not arrest Dolezal. The official series had already ended, almost a year before. On the 8th of July, 1939, the New York Times reported that a prisoner had admitted 1 torso slaying. A press fact, not a verdict. Dolezal confessed to killing Polillo. Self-defense, in some tellings. Then he recanted. The confession, he said, had been beaten out of him. The Cleveland Police Museum would later call it incoherent ramblings mixed with neat, precise details, almost as if coached. On the 24th of August, 1939, Frank Dolezal was found hanged in the Cuyahoga County Jail. The official ruling was suicide. He stood 5 feet 8. The hook was 5 feet 7 off the floor. Coroner Samuel Gerber's autopsy recorded 6 broken ribs, sustained while Dolezal was in the sheriff's custody. Those are the measurements. No court ever called it anything but suicide. Gerber remained Cuyahoga's coroner from 1937 to 1986. O'Donnell died in 1941. Dolezal was never tried, so there was no conviction to vacate. Posthumously exonerated is not a court finding. In August 2010, a Rest Now marker was placed on his grave. Family present. A gesture. Never convicted. A confession that collapsed. Almost nobody in the modern file believes he was the butcher. 1 death in custody. Still 0 convictions. The sheriff's man is gone. The safety director's man was never charged. A third name sometimes gets pulled toward this case from 1942. A different murder, a different year, an execution in 1944, never conclusively linked to the official 12. Never conclusively linked is where that name ends. The official butcher has no name in a verdict, because there was no verdict. Murillo believed the map ran larger than Cleveland. Newcastle, Pittsburgh, a place the papers called Murder Swamp. Boxcar bodies on the Baltimore and Ohio line. Years running from 1921 into 1942. That was his theory, not a finding. Separate geography. Those dead are not in Cleveland's 12. He died on the 2nd of May, 1958, at 63. Still the lead detective on a file that never went to trial. On the 22nd of July, 1950, at 2138 Davenport Avenue, a man named Robert Robertson, 41, was found. Dead 6 to 8 weeks. The decapitation appeared intentional. The press linked him to the old series. Detectives treated it as an isolated crime. He is a candidate in the wider conversation. He is not one of the 12. The official Cleveland tally does not move for him. From confinement, the story goes, Sweeney sent taunting postcards to Ness into the 1950s. They stopped after Ness's death in 1957. One later letter, dated the 14th of February 1954, from the Dayton Veterans Hospital, is described as signed with Sweeney's name. The cards survive as a Ness family and investigation story. They are not a confession. Harassment from an asylum, if the cards are genuine, does not name a butcher in court. Ness left the safety director's post in 1942. Years after, he ran for mayor of Cleveland and lost. A painted campaign wall on 36th and Cedar still carried his name when a federal photographer passed it. He died on the 16th of May, 1957, in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. Heart attack. 54 years old. In debt. His ashes are at Lakeview Cemetery, in the city that never got an arrest from him. The Untouchables. The book that made him a television myth, written with Oscar Fraley, came out after he was already dead. The fedora is a later costume. The man in this file was a 32-year-old safety director with a ravine he could not close. He later claimed to have solved it. There was never an arrest, never an indictment, never a conviction of his preferred suspect. One by one, the case outlived its keepers. Orly May died on the 27th of January, 1968, in St. Petersburg. David Cowles, in January 1988, at 92. Samuel Gerber, on the 16th of May, 1987. Martin L. Sweeney, on the 1st of May, 1960. Keeler, who ran the box, on the 20th of September, 1949. The men who had walked the tracks were gone. The 9 unnamed stayed unnamed, and the killer was never discovered. That sentence is the encyclopedia of Cleveland history, not a flourish. The Cleveland Police Museum. No suspect officially identified. No one brought to trial. Every responsible summary lands in the same place. Never apprehended. Not solved by Ness. Not solved by the sheriff. Not solved by a postcard. The file is open because the record is open. In August 2024, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office and the DNA Doe Project began exhuming unidentified victims. Among those named for that work, the tattooed man and a 1938 lakefront victim. This is victim identification science. It can give a Jane Doe her name back. It cannot by itself name the butcher. As of this recording, no identity from those exhumations has been published. If that work ever publishes a name, the case moves in the only direction left to it, toward the dead. A laundry mark and 6 tattoos become a person. A lakefront Jane Doe becomes a daughter or a sister. The official butcher still has no courtroom name because a genome from a grave is not a fingerprint on a knife. Naming the dead is not naming the man who made them dead. 12 people, 2 names, 9 still blank. That is the fact that was waiting at the end of this file. 2 came back from fingerprints: Edward Andrassy, Florence Polillo. Rose Wallace remains, officially, Jane Doe 2. The 1934 woman in the lake is a candidate. Robert Robertson in 1950 is a candidate. Neither enters the 12. 0 convictions. 1 death in the sheriff's jail. The butcher has no name. Most of his victims still don't either. A celebrity lawman is not the protagonist of other people's deaths. Ness is the reason the case is remembered. The queue at the exposition is the reason it still hurts. A city walked past a plaster face and could not say the name. The raid burned the pond and did not catch a man. The sheriff produced a bricklayer and lost him in a cell. None of that is a solution. What would close the file is easy to name, and none of it has happened. A charge that survives a courtroom. A published genetic identification of any of the 9. A document that turns Ness's private certainty into evidence. The 2024 work might still deliver the second of those. It would name the dead. It would not, by itself, finish the living half of the mystery. So the file stays open where the hillside left it. Kingsbury Run, Cleveland. 12 on the official list. September 1935 to August 1938. 2 names recovered from ink. 9 still blank. The most famous lawman in America never made an arrest. If one of the unnamed ever gets her name back, this file gets reopened with her. This has been the Static Files. Follow the Static Files for a new unsolved case every week.